All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our library virtual tasting, a look back at the 2013 vintage. My name is Ivy Haynes, and I'm the marketing manager for Michael Schaap's Wineworks. And today, it's really exciting. We're going to do 3 2013 vintage wines, and hopefully everyone has their sample bottles, which are enough for 2 people. It's really exciting. So we have our 2013 Chardonnay, our 2013 Petit Verdot, and our 2013 El Scott. So thank you all for coming. And if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt us and just unmute yourself and let's just chat about wine. So let's get started with Michael. And Michael, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Unmute me, Ivy.
There we go.
All right. Hi, everybody. Good to see everyone. And this is the first, I guess, no, I did the wine dinner from home, but this is the first group Zoom I'm doing from home. And that way I can enjoy, drink more. I don't have to worry about driving home. That's why we planned it Saturday afternoon, so we can just go right into the evening. So I'm excited to taste the 13s. Obviously, I tasted all these before we decided on what we wanted to do for this tasting. But the reason I wanted to look at the 13s is a little bit to do with the growing season and how I knew with the wines when we made the wines what their potential were, and I think it was a good time to really look to see how they're holding up. So I'll tell you a little bit. Let's talk about the vintage first, and then we'll talk about go from Chardonnay, Petit Verdot, and then the El Scott. So if you haven't opened your sample bottles or your big bottles, make sure you have everything opened. I would recommend pouring them into the glasses now and let them breathe. It would really benefit everything if they're in glasses and getting some air. And so when we get to them, they'll be ready. So the 2013 was a challenging vintage. We had a ton of spring rain, a lot of rain, more than our normal rain, which is a lot anyway, but it was very wet into June. I remember in June getting real nervous about the potential for the vintage because it was more than our amount of rain that we normally see. And then things started to get better towards the end of July, and the sun came out and dried out for much of August. And so my concern going into veraison, which is late July, early August, was whether or not the reds were going to get a good amount of heat and dry conditions so they can ripen and really be the type of reds that we would hope for, with lots of concentration and good structure. So we did get a dry August, which helped a lot. Things started to bounce back. It was really nice, cooled off. And then we had some late August, early September rain, which in Central Virginia, which really hurt the Merlot in terms of concentration, not in terms of rot or any problems with the quality of the fruit. It's just got a little bit diluted. And Merlot is unique in Virginia because for me, I love Merlot. I think it's one of our best varietals to grow around here in our vineyards. But the problem with Merlot, when it gets rained on right close to harvest, it has trouble bouncing back and concentrating. It just seems to kind of shut down and just stays in terms of its maturity where it's at. It doesn't really, a lot of varieties, you get a week of dry weather, it starts to concentrate again, the sugars go up, and it really gets more, it dehydrates like it should. But Merlot seems to just kind of stay in a hold where it's at. And that's what happened in 13. So the Merlots weren't as big and rich and structured as I had hoped. But then it dried out in the middle of September towards the end of the vintage. So the later season varieties like the Petit Verdot and the Tannat did well. And our Chardonnay and Malbec that we're going to taste today, the Chardonnay is, of course, from Wild Meadow, which is our single vineyard up in Percival. And that ripens later. So that was took advantage of the dry spell in September. So it was when the rains came in a little bit of rain in August, it didn't get affected because they weren't as at a same level of maturity as the Merlot and say in Charlottesville. So it had several weeks to dry out and ripen nicely. And the Chardonnay is fantastic. the PV and I'm sorry, the Malbec up there as well ripens the same time as the Chardonnay. So it was later in September. So the Malbec was really nice. And so the PV is later in Charlottesville. So it ripened towards the end of September, and we had a really nice crop of Petit Verdot, but still not our biggest vintage overall. We could compare at the end, talk about different vintages if you'd like. So that was kind of it in a nutshell. So the Chardonnay and the PV are kind of made, we'll talk about this the way I normally do, but the El Scott blend is a little different than, you know, how I'd like to make them every year. And we'll talk about that as well. So having said that, let's talk about the Chardonnay first. Hopefully everybody has a glass of Chardonnay, and I'm pretty sure all you guys are familiar with my Chardonnay, the Wild Meadow Chardonnay. I've been making this now since 2007 when I discovered the vineyard. Up until then, I'd never made a Chardonnay under my label in Virginia because I couldn't find a vineyard site that I thought was, you know, suitable for the quality of Chardonnay that I wanted to produce. You know, in Central Virginia, it's just too hot for me for Chardonnay. It really gets too hot, and Chardonnay, as it ripens in the end of August or September, loses all of its natural acidity. And for me, the Chardonnays, personally, I find a lot of the Chardonnays around here a little too flabby and don't have enough acidity or fruit, and they get kind of one-dimensional, just simple either oak or very, you know, very neutral flavors. So when I found this vineyard through connections, this Wild Meadow Vineyard in Purcellville, I was excited because it's 2 hours north of Charlottesville, and it ripens 2 weeks later than Chardonnay in Charlottesville. So it's ripening mid to late September mostly. When it's cooler up there, you get cooler nighttime temperature, which helps keep the freshness in the grapes and keep the acidity to levels that we're familiar with in Burgundy. And so 2007 was my first go at this vineyard, and I couldn't believe the chemistry of the grapes when they came out of the vineyard. They were just textbook numbers. The wine, you know, I was said since the beginning, this wine is made in the vineyard. The quality of the grapes that come in, we don't have to do anything, just ferment it the style I like to. We don't have to manipulate anything, acids or sugars or anything. And so I've been in love with this site since I first made it in 2007, and still making it here in 2020. We made it, and we can keep it confidential amongst us. But I entered 3 vintages of the Wild Meadow Chardonnay in the Governor's Cup this year. Am I gonna get in trouble, Ivy?
Michael, don't do it. Don't do it. You're not allowed to.
None of them were in the case, but all 3 vintages got gold medal, which the official announcement is not until Tuesday. So
keep it on the DL.
me out of the competition, but amongst friends here, which is, to me, this Chardonnay every year in the Governor's Cup, I need to do some research, because I really think this is the most awarded, gold medal awarded Chardonnay in the Governor's Cup going back to when I started making it. It is that consistent and that special of a vineyard that every year it gets a gold medal.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
If you were tasting that to what we're tasting now, how would they be similar and different?
Tasting which? The Chardonnays and which ones?
The Chardonnay, yeah, this Chardonnay today, and then the ones that just got the gold medal.
So actually, the 2013 we're tasting today, and the ones that I sent in, the current release of the Chardonnay is the 2016. So most Virginia people are selling Chardonnay right now are selling the 2019 or maybe 2018. But the beauty of this vineyard and the style of winemaking that I like is this vineyard reminds me a lot of what I do in Meursault, which is the holy grail for Chardonnay. And Burgundian Chardonnays are traditionally the style is for ageability, and they need time to age. And our current, for example, we currently we just switched from the 2016 Meursault to the 2017 Meursault, and it's too young. It's still that wine's too young. And right now, the Burgundies you're drinking 2014. You're drinking this aged style Chardonnay. So in terms of how it tastes different, when you taste this one, you see that it's still got the nice acidity, but it's deepened. It's more drier notes, some nuttiness, a little more viscosity, a little more length to it. Whereas the younger Chardonnay is going to be more vibrant, brighter acidity. You won't get as much complexity on it. And maybe more oak will come through on the younger Chardonnays. A little too, the oak that I use is pretty heavy compared to a lot of other Chardonnay producers. But in the Burgundian tradition, it's made to age with the wine. And as the wine ages, the oak dissipates and helps deepen the wine. So you don't get the toasty vanilla butterscotch characteristics on an older Chardonnay. It's been nuanced into the wine, where a young Chardonnay, you're just going to get, toast and smoke and, a lot of vanilla. So that's how the wine Chardonnay ages. But a good
Thank you.
Chardonnay, I'm sorry. Oh, you're still muted.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. So back to this, this Chardonnay. So we're very fortunate that it came in, later after the rains, and it dried out, and we picked this Chardonnay up in Percival and drive it down to the winery, 2 hours. And the Chardonnay has been made the same way, and it's the exact same way I make the Burgundies. It is all barrel fermented, but not inoculated with any yeast. It's we call natural fermentation or wild yeast fermentation, the old school way. And that is a very slow and challenging process. Without a commercial yeast strain added to the barrels, you're kind of just hoping that the yeast strains you have in the barrel, in the air, or from the vineyard will be the correct yeast strains and give you the proper flavors. But I've been doing this so long and have a technique now where we do a starter keg. We take some juice and put in a keg and get it going and monitor it and taste it. And once that starts fermenting, then we add it back to the barrels. So we know we have a good yeast strain that we're adding to the barrels, and that's how we do the fermentation. But the problem is with a natural fermentation, it is very slow. There's not the same amount of yeast that's active converting the sugar into alcohol. So sometimes the yeast strains start to fade and start to die off, and that process from juice to wine is very slow and very long. Traditional commercial yeast strains will finish fermenting a Chardonnay in 10 days, 2 weeks. My Chardonnays sometimes don't finish till the spring or even the summer, as in the 2019 just finally finished in the summer. And it's a very dangerous, way to make Chardonnay, because if it doesn't finish, you have a lot of sugar, not a lot, but you have sugar in the wine, and it'll be a little bit sweeter. You want it all to be converted to alcohol. So it depends on the vintage, it depends on the conditions in the cellar and the yeast strains, but they all end up finishing at some point. But sometimes it can be very stressful trying to get that last, 5, 10, 20 grams of sugar to convert into alcohol. But on the other side, the benefit is that slow transition from juice to wine retains a lot of the natural fruit components of the grapes. A commercial yeast strain is a hot, fast fermentation, and it burns up a lot of that volatile aromas that we like to keep in the wine. A slower transition retains a lot of that nice natural fruit. So that's why I do it. And it's a challenge, and it's a lot of wineries don't do it because it's pretty risky. But for me, I think it makes all the difference in the world. So it's fermented in French oak, the same barrels I use in France. And it's 50% brand new French oak every year. And that not only is that expensive, but you're also, taking the chance of maybe adding too much oak to the vintage. So in certain years, occasionally, if I know it's not a big classic vintage, I might back off on the new oak and do, 35, 45% of the blend new barrels. But all in all, like this one was 50% new oak. So when it's young, it's too oaky. Even for me, I find it too oaky. But when you get to where it's at now, this wine, the oak is barely noticeable at all. It's really integrated nicely into the wine.